From the magazine, Vanity Fair, October 1997 issue, by Anne Louise Bardock, October 1, 1997. JonBenét Ramsey, Missing Innocence. The Christmas night murder of a 6-year-old beauty pageant winner, JonBenét Ramsey, in Boulder, Colorado, shocked the country and turned her millionaire parents, John and Patsy, into suspects. With sources deep inside the investigation and among Ramsey relatives and friends, Anne Louise Bardock reveals the story behind the dreadful crime and the bitter split between the DA's office and the police department. Patrol Officer Richard French got to the home of John and Patsy Ramsey in the Tony neighborhood adjacent to Chautauqua Park in Boulder, Colorado, within 7 minutes of Patsy Ramsey's 911 call reporting that their 6-year-old daughter, child beauty pageant winner JonBenét, had been kidnapped. It was 5:52 a.m. on December 26th, and the distraught and weeping mother, a former Miss West Virginia and Miss America contender, let French in. John Ramsey directed me through the house and pointed out a 3-page, handwritten note which was laid on the wooden floor just west of the kitchen area, French reported. Subsequently, French told colleagues that he had been struck by how differently the two parents were reacting. While John Ramsey, cool and collected, explained the sequence of events to him, Patsy Ramsey sat in an overstuffed chair in the sunroom, sobbing. Something seemed odd to French, and later he would recall how the grieving mother's eyes stayed riveted on him. He remembered her gaze and her awkward attempt to conceal it, peering at him through splayed fingers held over her eyes. 7 hours later, the body of the child was found in a storage room in the basement. French told fellow officers that he felt awful that he had not discovered it himself in his search of the house. For months, he berated himself as he relived every moment of his hours there. While Patsy had wept inconsolably, a dry-eyed John Ramsey had paced incessantly. Later, French recalled that the couple had barely spoken to or looked at each other, though they were faced with the most calamitous tragedy of their lives. He did not see them console each other. But it was the image of Patsy weeping and watching him that haunted French, especially after he learned that she had been sitting directly over the spotless, then 15 feet below, where her child's body lay. The Ramseys, with JonBenét and their son Burke, had had Christmas dinner at the home of their best friends, Priscilla and Fleet White Jr., a mile or so away. After Ramsey had moved his computer company from Atlanta, Georgia to Boulder in 1991, the Whites and the Ramseys found that they had much in common. Fleet White was also a successful tycoon in the oil business. Both couples enjoyed sailing and had 6-year-old girls with older brothers. Neither Patsy nor Priscilla worked, but both were committed volunteers. When John Ramsey had decided to throw his wife a surprise 40th birthday party a month earlier, on November 30, he turned to Priscilla to organize the event at the Swank Brown Palace in Denver. According to police reports, the Ramseys arrived home from the Whites about 10 p.m. At 5:55 a.m., the Whites were awakened by John Ramsey, who told them to hurry right over. By 6:20, the Whites were there, joined by other friends John and Barbara Fernie, and later by the Ramseys' minister, Father Roll Hoverstock. Several uniformed policemen assisted Rick French until 8:10 a.m., when Detective Linda Arndt arrived. Arndt's supervisor, Detective Sergeant Larry Mason, would get to the house later that day. The initial team assumed that the troubled, affluent couple were victims, not potential murder suspects. They even summoned 2 victim advocates to the house to comfort them. Arndt, in particular, who was described by fellow officers as having bonded with Patsy Ramsey, made several critical and possibly irreparable errors in judgment. The ransom note warned the couple not to contact the police, but to await a phone call between 8 and 10 that morning. Arndt wrote in her report that between 10:30 and noon, John Ramsey left the house to pick up the family mail, which she later saw him open and read. At 1 p.m., when no call had come, Arndt asked Ramsey and Fleet White to follow her to the kitchen. An investigator described the scene. She said, "I want you to search this house from top to bottom." She had barely finished speaking when John Ramsey bolted from the kitchen and headed down to the basement. Fleet White told us that Ramsey went directly to a small broken window on the north side of the house and paused. Fleet said to Ramsey, "Hey John, look at this." And John said, "Yeah, I broke it last summer." He wanted Fleet to see the window to set up an intruder theory. But no one but a small child or a midget could have crawled through that space. While Fleet is looking at the window, John disappears down the hall directly to the little room where the body is. It's a huge basement with a lot of rooms and corridors. But Ramsey went directly to that room. He screamed, and Fleet ran to him. White had previously peered into that windowless storage room, but had not seen the body. Lying on the cement floor was the lifeless JonBenét, dressed in a white knit shirt and long underwear. There was duct tape over her mouth. A garrote made of white cord and a broken artist's paintbrush handle was around her throat, and there was a cord around her right wrist. The body was covered with a white blanket from her bed. Nearby was her red pageant nightgown, described by a relative as her favorite possession. Ramsey yanked the tape from her mouth and, according to the investigator, holding her with both hands around her at the waist, the way you would hold a doll, carried her upstairs and laid her on the hardwood floor in the living room. What was interesting was when Ramsey brought the body upstairs, he never cried, related a source present at the time. But when he laid her down, he started to moan while peering around to see who was looking at him. Linda Arndt lifted the child from the floor and placed her alongside the Christmas tree. Patsy collapsed right on top of JonBenét, said the source, and then she got on her knees and screamed, "Jesus, you raised Lazarus from the dead. Please raise my baby." Arndt asked Father Roll to gather everyone into a circle around the child and lead them in prayer. Numb with grief and horror, they bowed their heads and said the Lord's Prayer. The following evening at the Fernie's house in South Boulder, Linda Arndt approached John Ramsey, but Ramsey's lawyer friend Mike Bynum cut off the conversation, telling Arndt that legal advisors had been retained to speak for the Ramseys. The next day, the police were informed that the Ramseys had nothing more to say and would answer no further questions. Although John Ramsey was a lifelong conservative Republican, he turned to Haddon, Morgan and Foreman, a law firm almost synonymous with Colorado's Democratic political machine. "Take a look at their offices here in Denver," says Chuck Green, a columnist at the Denver Post, referring to the gated mansion that houses the firm. Then take a walk over to the governor's mansion a few blocks away and tell me which one is bigger, and I'll tell you which one is more powerful. During the 70s and 80s, Hal Haddon ran Gary Hart's campaign for senator and was an advisor on his presidential campaign. Haddon became known as a power broker and kingmaker and had a reputation for socializing with clients such as Hunter S. Thompson, Governor Roy Romer, former Governor Richard Lamb, and Congressman David Skaggs, are all political allies of Haddon's, as is Alex Hunter, Boulder's longtime district attorney. Haddon's partners, Brian Morgan and Lee Foreman, by arguing a controversial intruder theory, won an acquittal in the celebrated 1980 trial of Lee Bibb Lindsley, who was accused of murdering her husband, a prominent Colorado pediatrician. On a ratio of 12-1, child murders are committed by parents or a family member, says FBI veteran Greg McCrary. Ramsey decided that his wife should have her own lawyers, and he retained Patrick Burke and Patrick Furman. Within a week of the murder, a media consultant named Pat Corton was also brought aboard, later to be replaced by Rochelle Zimmer and Lori Wagner. In July, Denver's premier publicist Charles Russell was added to the payroll. In addition to his lawyer's team of private investigators, Ramsey retained the Denver firm of H. Ellis Armstead, as well as a former FBI criminal profiler and 2 handwriting analysts. After the police tried to question Ramsey's first wife in Atlanta, he also hired a lawyer there named James Jenkins. Comparisons are inevitably made to O.J. Simpson, but John Ramsey is far wealthier. And, unlike the Simpson Dream Team, Ramsey's lawyers have sought invincibility. Ironically, 2 Simpson defenders, Barry Scheck and forensic scientist Henry Lee, have made themselves available to the Boulder DA. Some say in an effort to refurbish their post-Simpson image. The one press conference Haddon's team has permitted the Ramseys in the Boulder Marriott on May 1 was so elaborately orchestrated that it was called the Ramsey Infomercial by Denver Talk radio host Peter Boyles. The Ramsey team of lawyers and publicists stood against a back wall, but the selected reporters had agreed not to question them. It was not the first time that a carefully packaged appearance had backfired. On Sunday, January 5th, media consultant Pat Corton had arranged to have television crews outside of St. John's Episcopal Church in Boulder. During the service, there was a special handout personalized for the Ramsey family, offering prayers for them, says a parishioner who was present. We were appalled because a lot of people had qualms about believing them by then. Outside the church was a throng of photographers waiting to capture a sobbing Patsy exiting on the arm of Barbara Fernie. They totally used the church as a photo opportunity, says the parishioner. The Ramseys' appearance on CNN in Atlanta on January 1st had also raised questions. Why would a grieving couple go on national television while refusing to speak to the police? What did John Ramsey mean by saying, "I don't know if it was an attack on me, on my company"? 8 months after the murder, to the bafflement of the public, the FBI and the police, Haddon's team has been singularly successful in dissuading Boulder DA Alex Hunter from filing charges. The public perception, whether true or not, is that Hal Haddon can knock out Alex Hunter blindfolded with his hands tied behind his back, says columnist Chuck Green. Hunter's team is led by trial attorney Peter Hofstrom, a former prison guard at San Quentin who has worked with Hunter for 23 years. Trip DeMuth, Hofstrom's handsome assistant, and Lou Smith, a retired homicide detective. The police followed up their initial ineptitude by rapidly assembling a group of 6 experienced detectives. Led by Tom Wickman, they were Ron Gosage, Jan Harmer, Melissa Hickman, Steve Thomas, and Tom Trujillo. Hofstrom's and Wickman's teams are supposed to be working together in their high-security war room, but trust between the two was quickly shattered. Peter Boyles, whose daily coverage of the Ramsey case has won him national celebrity, has an admittedly personal interest. Pioneer talk radio host Alan Berg, his best friend and mentor, was gunned down in 1984 by neo-Nazi thugs. Ramsey lawyers Pat Burke and Lee Foreman represented 2 of the accused. Boyle says that Alex Hunter, whom he calls Monty Hall, of Let's Make a Deal fame, has never met a criminal he thinks is fit for jail. Chuck Green, who calls Alex Hunter Mr. Plea Bargain, has savaged his office as the Hunter Ramsey team. End of part 1.